We're pleased to welcome Governor Mitch Daniels of Indiana. He had an op-ed piece in the Wall Street Journal where you talk, Governor, about perhaps what will be a permanent reduction in tax revenues for states around the country and what that will do to government planning going forward. We welcome you. What do you make of the jobs report? First of all, your unemployment rate is 10.6%. You're in a little better shape than some other states right now.
Yeah, but nobody's in the shape they want to be in, Bill. And while I certainly agree with what I just heard, that emphasis ought to be on economic growth, much of what's happening in Washington today almost seems designed to create the opposite effect. You know, the only jobs growing in this economy have been government jobs, and that's a chase-your-tail strategy that will be very self-defeating long-term. So, you know, about the future of state government finance, I hope I'm wrong, but I fear I'm right, that unlike after past recessions where in a year or two revenues jump back up on their previous trend line, I think there may be a notch down this time. Even when they begin to grow again, they won't catch back up to where they were, and people have to adjust for that. Your
point in the op-ed piece, two things: no capital gains for the foreseeable future, and two, it was who the states were taxing when they were, in some cases, you point to California, for example, where they were taxing the highest 1% of the wealthiest in that state to bring in the lion's share of income taxes for that state. I mean, there has to be a rejiggering, you seem to suggest, in the way revenues are brought into state coffers in the future.
Yeah, the scam of taxing the daylights out of a few people and a few businesses worked all right during a bubble, but it'll be enormously self-destructive in the economy we're in now, or the one I think that we're likely to see. And the other, I think the most salient fact of all has to do with consumption and savings. States, of course, unlike the federal government, derive a huge percentage of their revenue, about a third on average. There are several states more than half, from the sales tax. When people were spending like the proverbial sailors, borrowing to do so, that worked out okay, and states were flush in money. Okay. I don't think that money's coming back.
Mitch Daniels, Mr. Secretary, go ahead. Yeah, let me just ask you a question. Mitch, we are often accused, those of us who believe in the power of private capital and free enterprise are accused of just criticizing the government's programs but not offering up our own. What would you say we need to do? We've got a huge deficit. The economy is still hurting, is still wounded. What kind of a policy shift do you think we should have?
Well, first let me say I try to stay in my lane out here. We've got our hands full trying to deal successfully with the problems of 2.5% of America.
Your days as a White House economist are over for now, huh?
Well, and let me point out, I for one didn't criticize the idea of a stimulus package. I think the one Congress wrote probably not much like the one the president had in mind. I wish we're going to print that money.
But you mentioned that
Chinese, we'd have spent it more on infrastructure and things like that. But I'll just say that pretty soon we're going to have a grown-up conversation in this country. We're going to have to fundamentally, I believe, reform and downscope the entitlement programs, or we're going to hand an unsustainable bill to our kids. Investors will see that coming and run from this country.
It's important to also factor in the fact that the war and military spending, which has occurred since 2003, has also propelled the deficit. It's not simply entitlements. It's not simply domestic spending. It's a combination of things. And when you don't have economic growth, tax revenues go down. So I think what we've got to focus on is how can we get the economy growing again. It's not easy. I think it takes a combination of both the government and the private sector, and I don't think we should have false arguments that it's one or the other.
But the problem is that in addition to that, we've got a whole bunch of new plans for additional spending way beyond that at a time of no economic growth. Governor Daniels, how much of the state financial crisis now affecting many states is because, oh my gosh, not our fault, the economy went down, versus we got too fat and happy during the boom and we don't cut our services enough once our revenue goes down at the state level?
More the latter than the former. Clearly the economy hurt every state, and even states that were in strong shape had to struggle. But you know, there's a fundamental difference where we live. We don't have a printing press, and states, certainly our state, has to and has adjusted spending to the available revenues. Washington can whistle past the graveyard for a while longer, borrowing abroad and printing at home. But here in the States, the reality comes more quickly. And there were many states that were spending very freely. The growth in state spending on the record was very high for years, and that game ran out.
What happens to the state budgets if the House bill on health care goes through?
Well, they're finished. Many of them are finished. Dumping a huge new bill by expanding Medicaid, another bill on top of states that are broke now, just totally unsustainable. We're in better shape than almost any state, and we couldn't afford it. So I really fear for those who are much more under the gun today.
Look what happens in health care if you allow the status quo to continue. The status quo now is that people go to the emergency room. Let's not pretend that that's not being paid for, and that's being paid for by the federal government through the disproportionate share program. So let's not pretend that what we're doing now is not going to increase government spending.
Right.
We need to shift to prevention. We need to change the system. To do nothing is worse than trying to do something.
Well, nothing might be better than doing $1.6 trillion, but we got to wrap, right?
We do, gentlemen. I'm sorry.
Let's not pretend that adding $1 trillion in a health care spending bill, adding hundreds of billions of dollars through higher utility rates in a cap and trade bill, and on top of budgets that are running at breathtaking deficits already,
Governor, how much
has anything to do with economic growth. It will produce the reverse effect.
Well, let me ask you, how much did we add when we did Medicaid Part D and the prescription drug benefit program?
$9 trillion in future obligations, and we have no revenue to cover $9 trillion.
How much did we add?
Okay, got it right.
At that time. So that was done in another era. So
I think we all agree that
that
this bill is not fully cooked yet, and the President has an important speech to Congress next week, so maybe we'll get more details on what his ideas are for that now.
Good conversation, though.
Governor Daniels, we appreciate your time, sir. Thank you for being with us today. Mark Morial, always good to see you.
Great,
Next month as well.
Good.
We'll take a break.